You won't believe what happened on this flight. What started as a routine trip turned into a shocking scandal when a flight attendant kicked a black family off the plane, only to later discover they own the airline. This story will have you on the edge of your seat as we dive into twists, turns, and consequences no one saw coming. Watch until the end to see how it all unfolds. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that will leave you speechless. Now let's get into it. The airport was buzzing with activity as passengers rushed to board their flights. The cool air inside the terminal carried the scent of coffee and fresh pastries, mixing with the hum of distant conversations and overhead announcements. At Gate 17, passengers lined up to board Flight 762 to Los Angeles, eager to settle into their seats for the 5-hour journey. Among them was a black family, a well-dressed man in a navy blue suit, his elegant wife in a cream-colored dress, and their 2 young children, both neatly dressed and carrying small backpacks. They handed their first-class tickets to the flight attendant at the gate with calm smiles, expecting nothing but a smooth journey ahead. But Jessica Larson, the senior flight attendant on board, wasn't having it. The moment she saw the family step onto the plane, her stomach tightened. Something about them felt off. She scanned their boarding passes, her lips pressing into a tight line. First class? She thought to herself, unable to hide her skepticism. They didn't look like her usual first-class passengers, the wealthy business executives, socialites, and celebrities who regularly occupied the premium seats. These people didn't belong here. Trying to keep her tone polite but firm, she narrowed her eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake. First class is reserved for premium passengers." The father, David Carter, raised an eyebrow. "We are premium passengers," he said calmly, sliding the tickets closer to her. Jessica forced a smile, but her chest burned with annoyance. She had worked in first class for over 10 years, and she prided herself on keeping the section exclusive. She knew when someone was out of place. In this family, they didn't belong. Still, the system confirmed their tickets. But Jessica had made up her mind. She turned to them, lowering her voice. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have policies in place for situations like this." David frowned. "Situations like what?" Jessica didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward the exit, her patience thinning. "Please step off the plane." Passengers in first class turned to watch. Whispers started. A few people looked uncomfortable. Others simply stared, waiting for the family to react. David's wife, Angela, tightened her grip on their children's hands. "We have first-class tickets," she said, keeping her voice even. "We paid for these seats. Why are you asking us to leave?" Jessica exhaled sharply, forcing a sweet but fake smile. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist." David's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he exchanged a glance with Angela, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he picked up his carry-on bag and led his family off the plane. Jessica watched them go, her chest filling with satisfaction. But that feeling didn't last long, because as soon as the plane landed in Los Angeles, her entire world shattered. Waiting at the gate was the CEO of the airline, and standing beside him, David Carter. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as realization struck like a thunderbolt. David Carter wasn't just a passenger. He was the owner of the airline. Jessica's knees nearly buckled as she stared at the man she had just humiliated in front of an entire plane full of people. Her heart pounded violently as she struggled to breathe. And then, David turned to her. His voice was calm, deadly calm, as he said the words that made her stomach drop to the floor. "Jessica Larson, we need to talk." Just 6 hours earlier, Jessica had no idea that her biggest mistake was about to unfold. The day had started like any other. She arrived at JFK Airport at 6 a.m. sharp, greeted her fellow crew members, and sipped her morning coffee as they discussed the upcoming flight. Flight 762 was one of her favorites, a premium route that catered to the rich and powerful. First class was always filled with high-paying customers, and Jessica took pride in giving them the exclusive experience they expected. She had worked her way up from economy class, spending years perfecting her craft. She knew how to handle complaints, keep VIPs happy, and maintain order in the cabin. So when she saw David and Angela Carter board the plane with their 2 children, her instincts immediately told her something was off. She observed their clothing, their demeanor, the way they carried themselves. They weren't celebrities. They weren't executives. So how did they afford first-class seats? Jessica had seen it before. People gaming the system, fake upgrades, misunderstandings. She wasn't about to let it happen on her flight. As the family walked toward row 2, she followed closely behind, watching as they placed their bags in the overhead compartment. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir." David turned, his expression neutral. "Yes." Jessica folded her arms. "I need to check your tickets again." Angela frowned. "Is there a problem?" Jessica's polite smile never reached her eyes. "I just need to verify your reservation." David sighed, reaching into his pocket to pull out the printed tickets. He handed them to her without complaint. Jessica scanned them. First class. Verified. Confirmed. Her stomach tightened. There was no mistake. Still, something inside her refused to accept it. She made a decision. A dangerous decision. "I'm sorry, but there's been an issue with your booking," she lied smoothly. "You'll have to move to economy." Angela's lips parted in shock. "That's not possible. We paid for first class." Jessica tilted her head, her voice dripping with forced sympathy. "I understand your frustration, but there's nothing I can do. You'll have to move or leave the plane." The tension thickened. Nearby passengers started to shift uncomfortably in their seats. David inhaled deeply, his jaw tightening. "Are you saying we can't sit in the seats we paid for?" Jessica held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm saying you need to step off the plane." Angela gripped her children's hands, looking toward David for direction. For a moment, he simply stared at Jessica. Then, he nodded slowly. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Passengers whispered. Some watched in silent disbelief. Jessica felt victorious. She had done her job. She had protected first class. But she had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Jessica Larson couldn't move. She stood frozen at the arrival gate in Los Angeles, staring at the man she had just humiliated 6 hours earlier. David Carter. Not just a passenger. Not just a wealthy businessman. Not just someone who could afford first class. He was the owner of the airline. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. The terminal was bustling with activity. Passengers retrieving luggage, crew members chatting, families reuniting. But for Jessica, time had stopped. The CEO of West Sky Airlines, Richard Hamilton, stood beside David, his expression tight with anger. Jessica swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. This couldn't be happening. "Jessica," Hamilton's voice cut through the air, making her flinch. "Step over here. Now." Her feet felt like lead, but somehow she forced herself forward. David Carter's eyes were calm. Too calm. Jessica's stomach churned. She had expected him to explode in rage, to shout, to demand her immediate firing in front of everyone. But instead, he simply studied her, waiting. Jessica's palms were sweating. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight. Passengers from the flight were still coming off the plane, whispering as they passed by, sneaking glances at her. Jessica could hear the low murmurs. She kicked them off the plane. "Oh my God, that's the owner? She's finished." Panic clawed at her chest. She was losing control. Richard Hamilton sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Let's take this inside." He gestured toward a private VIP lounge, away from the crowd. Jessica hesitated, then followed silently, her legs shaking beneath her. The second the door clicked shut behind them, Hamilton turned to her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice was sharp, controlled, but filled with barely contained fury. Jessica tried to steady her breathing. "Sir, I was just following policy." Policy?" David Carter's voice was smooth, but the steel beneath it made Jessica's blood run cold. She turned to him, her stomach in knots. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the man who held her entire career in his hands. "Tell me, Miss Larson," he said, stepping closer. "What exactly was your reason for kicking my family off that flight?" Jessica's mouth opened, then closed. Think. She couldn't admit the truth. that she had taken one look at them and assumed they didn't belong, that she had seen a successful black family and immediately questioned their status, that she had used her power to put them in their place. Her mind scrambled for an excuse. There was a seating issue. David lifted an eyebrow. A seating issue? Hamilton crossed his arms, his glare burning into her. Jessica, I checked the system myself. Their first-class tickets were verified. There was no seating issue. Jessica's pulse thundered in her ears. I thought. What did you think? David's voice was quieter now, but somehow, it was even more terrifying. Jessica's mouth felt like cotton. I didn't know who you were. David let out a small, humorless chuckle. Oh, so if I were a celebrity, a billionaire, or someone you recognized, we wouldn't be having this conversation? Jessica's stomach twisted. Her head lowered. David shook his head, his expression unreadable. Let me ask you something. Jessica looked up slowly. His eyes pierced straight through her. Would you have done the same thing, he said, if my family looked like yours? Jessica stopped breathing. The question slammed into her chest like a freight train. Hamilton's jaw tightened. Jessica, be very careful with your answer. Jessica's throat burned. Her mind screamed for a way out, but there was nothing left to say, nothing that could undo what she had done. The room was dead silent. Then, David sighed. I see. Jessica's heart sank into her stomach. That was it. He had gotten his answer. Hamilton exhaled, shaking his head. Jessica, I have to say, I'm disgusted. I trusted you to represent this airline. And this? He gestured to David. You humiliated our company's owner on an international flight. Jessica's fingernails dug into her palms. I made a mistake. Her voice was small now. Weak. David's lips curled slightly. A mistake? Jessica nodded quickly. I swear, Mr. Carter, if I had known... David tilted his head. If you had known? Jessica stiffened. Hamilton's nostrils flared. Jessica, do you even realize how deep this runs? The other first-class passengers were watching. The crew was watching. Half the plane was watching. This isn't just about a bad customer service experience. This is about who we are as a company. David folded his arms. I don't just own this airline, Miss Larson. I own 6 companies, including a private aviation service. I've flown first class on hundreds of airlines. I know when someone is simply making a mistake. His eyes locked onto hers. And when someone is making a statement, Jessica's lungs felt tight. David took a step forward. You thought you could dismiss my family like we were nothing, that we wouldn't fight back, that we wouldn't have the power to hold you accountable. Jessica's body turned ice cold. David's voice was calm, but every word dripped with weight. Well, guess what, Miss Larson? Jessica's breath hitched. You're about to find out exactly what happens when you try to throw the wrong person off a plane. Jessica Larson felt like she was drowning. The walls of the VIP lounge seemed to close in on her, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. David Carter's words echoed in her mind, each one landing like a punch to the gut. You're about to find out exactly what happens when you try to throw the wrong person off a plane. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Hamilton, the CEO, pinched the bridge of his nose, his face dark with frustration. Jessica, I don't even know where to begin. Jessica's stomach twisted into knots. She had to fix this. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a weak smile, her voice trembling as she spoke. Mr. Carter, please, let me explain. David raised a hand. No, I've heard enough. His voice was quiet, calm, controlled, and that was what terrified Jessica the most. He wasn't shouting, Dot. He wasn't furious, Dot. He wasn't losing his temper, because he didn't need to. He already had all the power. Jessica's chest tightened. Sir, I was only trying to enforce airline policy. David's eyebrow lifted slightly. Policy? Jessica's mouth went dry. Wrong move. David tilted his head. Tell me something, Miss Larson. Jessica swallowed hard. Why, yes. Can you point to the exact policy that says my family didn't belong in first class? Jessica froze. Hamilton crossed his arms. Go on, Jessica. Answer him. Jessica's face burned. She stared at the floor, her mind scrambling for a way out. But there was no way out, because there was no policy, only her assumptions. David nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Jessica's stomach twisted painfully. Hamilton turned to David. Sir, I deeply apologize for what happened. This is completely unacceptable, and I assure you. David held up a hand. I'm not interested in apologies, Hamilton. Jessica's heart plummeted. This was it. This was the moment she lost everything. She had worked for 10 years to reach this position. She had sacrificed everything for this job. And now, it was all about to fall apart because of one moment. A moment she couldn't take back. Jessica suddenly felt sick. She had to fix this. She had to make him understand. She turned back to David, desperation creeping into her voice. Please, Mr. Carter. I didn't mean to offend you. If I had known who you were. David let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Jessica's stomach twisted. If you had known who I was, he repeated slowly, you would have treated my family with respect? Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She had walked straight into that trap. David shook his head. Miss Larson, I don't need respect because I'm rich. I don't need respect because I own this airline. I need respect because I'm a human being. My wife, my children, they deserve the same service as everyone else in first class. And you made a decision the moment you saw us, before we even spoke, that we didn't belong. Jessica felt lightheaded. This couldn't be happening. Hamilton's face was like stone. David, what do you want us to do? Jessica's heart nearly stopped. David sighed, adjusting his watch. For starters, he looked Hamilton dead in the eye. I want her fired. Immediately, Jessica felt the ground vanish beneath her. Wait, she gasped, her chest tightening. Hamilton didn't even hesitate. Done? Jessica staggered backward. Her vision blurred. No, no, no. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't fair. She turned to Hamilton, panic rising in her throat. Sir, please. I've worked for this airline for 10 years. I was one of your best flight attendants. I made a mistake, but I can fix this. Hamilton's jaw clenched. Jessica, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, and that choice cost you everything. David sighed, shaking his head. I should leave now. I have business to take care of. He turned to walk away. Jessica felt her entire world collapsing. But then, David paused at the door, and when he looked back at her, there was something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. A smile, but not a kind smile, not a forgiving smile. A smile that said, I'm not done with you yet. And then he spoke. Oh, and Miss Larson? Jessica barely managed to look up. I hope you enjoy the media attention. Jessica's lungs stopped working. Wait, what? David Carter smiled. Because this story? It's already on the news. Jessica stared in horror. Hamilton's eyes darkened. David, what do you mean it's on the news? David chuckled. Let's just say a few of your passengers on that flight have a very large following on social media. Jessica's stomach dropped. David nodded at her. And by tomorrow morning, the entire country will know your name. Jessica's knees nearly gave out. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her entire life. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Jessica Larson stared in horror, her pulse racing. By tomorrow morning, the entire country will know your name. David Carter's words rang in her ears, growing louder, heavier, suffocating. She felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about losing everything. Jessica's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her mind spun out of control. The media? The entire country? No, no, no. Her fingers gripped the armrest of the chair, her nails digging in. Wait, she choked out, this doesn't have to go public. David Carter gave her a slow, measured look. Oh, but it already has. He slid his phone out of his pocket, tilted the screen toward her, and pressed play. Jessica's stomach dropped. It was a video. Someone had recorded the entire incident. From the moment Jessica had confronted the Carter family at the gate to when she forced them off the plane, it was all there. Crystal clear. Undeniable. Jessica's mouth went dry as the video played. Her voice firm, condescending. David's wife, Angela, standing tall, holding onto her children's hands. David calm, dignified. And Jessica? She looked like a villain. The comments under the video flashed on the screen. This is what black people deal with every day. She didn't even try to hide it. You just kicked the owner of the airline off his own plane? LMAO. Poetic justice. I hope she loses her job. No. Her whole career. Fire her. DOXX her. Jessica couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. She snatched her own phone from her pocket. Her hands trembled as she opened Twitter. And there it was. Her name. Trending #1. Hashtag fire Jessica Larson. Hashtag West Sky Racist. Hashtag Justice for the Carters. Thousands of tweets. Jessica's throat closed up. The world was watching. Hamilton, the CEO, ran a hand through his graying hair. Jesus Christ. David locked eyes with him. Now do you see why this is bigger than just an internal issue? Hamilton sighed, rubbing his temples. I'll make an official statement. David smiled. Oh, I know you will. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. This was really happening. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This wasn't just losing her job. This was her entire life crashing down in real time. Jessica bolted to her feet, panic rising. I can fix this, she gasped. David raised an eyebrow. How exactly? Jessica searched for words, for any excuse, any way out. But there was nothing. Hamilton's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He checked it, his expression grim. The board is calling an emergency meeting, he muttered. This just got bigger than all of us. Jessica staggered backward. An emergency meeting? This wasn't just about her anymore. The entire airline was now at risk. Hamilton turned to David. I'll handle this personally. David nodded, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Good. Because trust me, if you don't handle it, I will. Jessica wanted to scream. This was spiraling out of control. She turned desperately to Hamilton. Sir, please. I'll apologize. I'll make a public statement. Just don't let them ruin me. Hamilton stared at her for a long, hard moment. Then he said the words that sent her world crashing down for good. Jessica, it's already too late. Jessica Larson stumbled out of the VIP lounge, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The world outside the glass doors of the airport terminal was moving too fast. People were glued to their phones, some whispering, pointing in her direction. Others were openly recording her. Her face was already out there. Her name was already out there. And now, her nightmare had truly begun. Hamilton's words rang in her ears. Jessica, it's already too late. She needed to think, to act, to escape. Her hands shook violently as she pulled out her phone, her heart hammering. She opened Twitter again, praying that somehow this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't. Hashtag fire Jessica Larson, 250K tweets. Hashtag West Sky Racist, 400K tweets. Hashtag Justice for the Carters, 1.2M tweets. Her vision blurred. Jessica scrolled through the posts, each one worse than the last. She needs to be blacklisted from the airline industry forever. I called her employer. They're holding a press conference in an hour. She's done. Who's got her address? I just want to talk. Find her LinkedIn. Every job she applies to, we shut it down. She better delete her social media. Too late, though. We got screenshots. Jessica's stomach lurched. Screenshots? Her hands trembled violently as she tapped on another post. Oh, she's got some history. A thread unfolded beneath it, filled with screenshots of old Facebook comments. Her comments. Years ago, before she joined West Sky Airlines, she had made jokes she shouldn't have. Snide remarks about certain types of passengers. A post about how she wished airlines could still have dress codes for who got to fly first class. It had all been dug up. Every bad thing she'd ever said. Every careless comment. Every mistake. Jessica's knees buckled. She grabbed onto a railing to keep from collapsing. They had everything. Her phone buzzed violently in her hands. A text from her best friend, Amber. Amber, Jessica, delete your socials. Now. Jessica's fingers fumbled over the screen, quickly opening. Instagram. Your account has been reported and is under review. Facebook. Your account has been flagged for violating community guidelines. Twitter. This account has been suspended. Jessica's entire body turned ice cold. They had shut her down. Completely. She was locked out of her own life. Her job? Gone. Her reputation? Destroyed. Her online presence? Erased. She felt like she was suffocating. She spun around, her eyes darting frantically through the airport. She needed to leave. To get away. But where? She had no idea where to go, what to do, or how to fix this. And then, a voice boomed over the airport intercom. Attention, passengers. We will now begin a press conference regarding today's events. Please proceed to Terminal C. Jessica froze. Her legs refused to move. She turned her head slowly toward the airport TVs. And there, on every single screen, was the CEO of Sky Airlines, Richard Hamilton, standing right beside David Carter. Jessica's blood ran cold. They were about to announce her fate to the entire world. Jessica Larson stood frozen, her entire body numb. The press conference was starting. Every TV screen in the airport flashed to life. Every phone in sight was streaming it live. And worst of all, every camera was rolling. She had nowhere to hide. Her throat went dry as the image of Richard Hamilton, CEO of Sky Airlines, appeared on screen. Beside him, David Carter stood tall and calm, hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Mr. Hamilton, is it true that one of your employees removed Mr. Carter and his family from a flight? Will she be fired? What action is Sky taking against discrimination? Hamilton held up a hand for silence. His face was grim, tight with controlled fury. Jessica's stomach twisted. Please don't say my name. Please don't say my name. Please don't. Hamilton exhaled sharply, adjusted his tie, and spoke. Earlier today, an unacceptable incident occurred on Sky Airlines Flight 762. Jessica's pulse pounded in her ears. A senior flight attendant on our staff made the decision to forcibly remove a family, our airline's owners, David and Angela Carter, from their first-class seats. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jessica felt her entire body go stiff. Hamilton continued, "Let me be absolutely clear. This is not just about one bad decision. This is about the culture we want to foster at Sky Airlines." He turned slightly, gesturing toward David. "I have spoken at length with Mr. Carter, and after reviewing the details of this case," Jessica's heartbeat thundered. "Jessica Larson is hereby terminated from Sky Airlines, effective immediately." The words hit like a punch to the chest. A chorus of clicking cameras and murmured reactions filled the airport. Jessica staggered backward, her vision blurring. Her worst nightmare had just been spoken into existence. Her name, set on live television. Her career, erased in real time. Her reputation, destroyed beyond repair. The press erupted with questions. Was this an isolated incident, or does this reflect a larger issue at Sky? Mr. Carter, how do you feel about the airline's response? David finally stepped forward. The room fell silent. His voice was steady, controlled, but filled with unmistakable weight. "I have no interest in revenge. I have no interest in making this about one person. But what happened today should never have happened." He locked eyes with the cameras. "I've spent my life working to break barriers. I've worked hard to build my family's legacy. And yet, today, my children had to watch their parents be humiliated simply because someone assumed they didn't belong." Jessica felt like she was suffocating. "This is bigger than me, bigger than my family. This is about every black person who's ever been told they're in the wrong space, no matter how much they've worked for it. And I will do everything in my power to make sure this never happens on my airline again." The room burst into applause. Jessica's hands shook violently. Her face burned as she felt dozens of eyes shifting toward her. The whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that her? Oh my God, it is. That's Jessica Larson, the one who kicked the Carters off the plane." A camera flash went off directly at her. Jessica jerked back, her breath coming in sharp gasps. This was spiraling too fast. She needed to get out. Now. But the moment she turned to run, a news anchor broke through the crowd and shoved a microphone in her face. "Miss Larson, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Jessica's blood ran cold. A second later, There she is! Get her! A mob of reporters lunged forward, cameras flashing, voices screaming, phones recording. Jessica panicked. She spun on her heels and ran. She shoved past travelers, dodging luggage, pushing through the crowded terminal. The cameras followed. The voices grew louder. The footsteps pounded behind her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. This was about losing her entire life. She had to find a way to stop this. Fast. Jessica Larson ran. She wasn't thinking. Her body moved on pure instinct, shoving past people, dodging rolling suitcases, her heart hammering in her chest. Voices chased her down the terminal. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Miss Larson, why did you kick them off the plane? Do you have anything to say to the Carters? Are you a racist? Jessica's chest tightened. The word hit her like a physical blow. Racist. She had never considered herself one. She had always seen herself as a professional. An authority figure. Someone who just knew who belonged in first class. But the world didn't see it that way. And now, she was public enemy number one. Jessica's legs burned as she sprinted toward the nearest airport exit, her lungs gasping for air. But security was already moving. 2 uniformed airport officers blocked the doors. Ma'am, we need you to step aside. Oh God! Oh God! She spun around, looking for another way out. But the crowd had grown. More reporters, more cameras, more travelers watching in real time. There was no escape. She was trapped. Jessica backed against a wall, her pulse pounding painfully in her ears. She needed to think. Fast. Then, her phone buzzed. She yanked it from her pocket, her hands trembling violently. A message from Amber. Don't say anything. Lawyer up. Call now. Jessica's breathing hitched. A lawyer. Yes. That's what she needed. Someone who could fix this. She turned her back to the cameras, shaking fingers dialing Amber's contact. The call connected. Amber, help me, she gasped. Amber's voice was sharp, urgent. Jessica, listen to me. You need to stop running. You look guilty as hell right now. Jessica whirled around, eyes darting at the crowd. Guilty? She wasn't guilty. Was she? Amber kept talking. You need a PR team. A lawyer. Someone to get ahead of this. But then, another voice broke through the chaos. Loud, powerful, commanding. Jessica Larson. Jessica froze. Her heart stopped, because standing right in front of her, walking through the parted sea of reporters like a king entering his courtroom, was David Carter. And the moment their eyes met, Jessica knew. She was finished. Jessica Larson felt her body go numb. David Carter stood before her, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. The press fell silent. Even the reporters, who had been screaming for a statement, now held their breath. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. And in the middle of it all, Jessica stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall, her pulse hammering in her ears. David tilted his head slightly, eyes sharp. Miss Larson, he said, his voice low, firm. Jessica couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Say something. Anything. Fix this. Her mind scrambled for words, but all she could think about was how she had humiliated him and his family in front of an entire plane. And now, the entire world was watching. David took a step closer. You have a lot to say when you're in charge of a plane, Miss Larson. But now, you're awfully quiet. Jessica swallowed hard. Mr. Carter, He raised a hand. Don't. Her words died in her throat. David studied her for a moment, then sighed. I should be angrier, he said, his voice measured. But the truth is, I've seen this before. Over and over. People like you, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. Jessica's stomach twisted. People like you. David's jaw tightened. Tell me something, Miss Larson. Jessica forced herself to meet his gaze. If my family looked different, if we looked like you, would you have treated us the same way? Her throat closed up. The words were there. Yes, of course. It had nothing to do with that. I was just following protocol. But she couldn't say them, because they weren't true. And David knew it. Jessica's vision blurred. This can't be happening. David exhaled sharply. I'm not here to ruin you, Miss Larson. Jessica blinked in surprise. What? The truth is, he continued, you ruined yourself. The words hit like a punch to the chest. Jessica's legs felt weak. No, 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 no. She could fix this. She had to. She straightened, forcing a small, shaky smile. Mr. Carter, I'm truly sorry. If I had known who you were. David's expression darkened instantly. That's the problem, isn't it? Jessica's mouth snapped shut. If I had known who you were. His voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. Respect isn't reserved for the powerful, Miss Larson. It's reserved for everyone. But you didn't see us as people. You saw us as a problem. Jessica felt sick. David took a step back, turning slightly toward the crowd of reporters. West Sky Airlines has handled this situation, he said. As far as I'm concerned, I have no further interest in Miss Larson. Jessica's heart nearly stopped. No further interest? Was that mercy? But then, David glanced over his shoulder, eyes locking on her one last time. And then he said the words that shattered her completely. But the internet? That's a whole different story. Jessica's breath hitched. No, no, no. David turned back toward the cameras. And just like that, he walked away. He was done with her. But the world was just getting started. Jessica Larson felt the world collapse around her. David Carter had walked away. But the damage was permanent. The cameras were still rolling. The reporters were still watching. The internet was on fire. She stood frozen, her mind spinning, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. And then, her phone buzzed violently in her hand. Amber, Jessica, get out of there, now. Jessica's fingers trembled as she clicked open the news apps. And that's when she saw it. CNN breaking news. Flight attendant kicks black family off plane. Finds out they own the airline. Fox News. West Sky Airlines fires Jessica Larson amid discrimination controversy. TMZ. Internet destroys Karen flight attendant. Her life is over. Jessica's stomach turned. It wasn't just Twitter anymore. It wasn't just some trending hashtag. It was everywhere. Jessica Larson ruined her career in less than 5 minutes. West Sky fired her? Good. Now let's make sure she never works again. Jessica's vision blurred. They weren't just celebrating her firing. They were dismantling her entire existence. And then, her phone rang again. Unknown caller. Her stomach clenched. Her breath hitched. She switched to her emails. Inbox, 1,487 unread messages. You're a disgusting human being. I hope you lose everything. Die, racist. I found your address. Sleep well. Jessica's knees buckled. They had found her personal information. Her phone number. Her address. Her family's details. Her hands started shaking uncontrollably. The room spun. She pressed her back against the wall, gasping for air. This wasn't just losing a job. This was her entire life unraveling in real time. And she couldn't stop it. She had to leave, had to disappear, had to find a way out before things got worse. But then, a man's voice rang through the terminal. Hey, that's her. Jessica's blood ran ice cold. She turned sharply and saw a group of travelers staring straight at her. One of them raised his phone, filming. Hey everyone, this is Jessica Larson, the flight attendant from the video. Jessica's heart stopped. More people turned to look. A murmur rippled through the terminal. And then, chaos. Someone shouted, "Get her!" Jessica spun on her heels and ran. Jessica Larson ran. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. And her vision blurred as she darted through the crowded terminal. People were pointing, whispering, filming. But she didn't dare stop. She couldn't. Her career was gone. Her reputation was in ruins. Her face was plastered across every news site in the country. And now, she was hunted. But then, she spotted an empty gate ahead. Jessica swerved, ducking behind a row of chairs, her chest heaving. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds, the cameras, the whispers. But it didn't work, because it wasn't just the people at the airport. It was the entire world. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling. She knew she shouldn't, but she had to see, had to know just how bad it had gotten. She tapped on YouTube. The top video? Jessica Larson, the flight attendant who lost everything. 2.7 million views in 3 hours. She clicked it. A news anchor spoke. Jessica Larson, a former flight attendant for West Airlines, has become one of the most infamous figures in recent viral history. Jessica's stomach twisted. She scrolled down. Hundreds, thousands, millions of comments. The way she got humble? Beautiful. Her life is over, and I love that for her. No second chances. She made her bed. What's her next job? Fast food? Jessica felt sick. There was no coming back from this. She was a villain now. A punchline. A warning to the world. She lowered the phone into her lap, staring blankly at the floor. For the first time in 2 days, her mind was completely empty. She had fought Dot. She had begged Dot. She had tried to explain, but nothing worked. This was her reality now. She had spent years believing she was in control, Dot. That she knew best, Dot. That power and authority were hers to wield. But David Carter had been right. Respect wasn't about power. It was about humanity. And she had failed. Jessica leaned back, her head resting against the cool plastic of the chair. Her world had ended faster than she ever thought possible. And maybe she deserved it. For the first time, she let the thought settle in. She had always told herself she wasn't one of those people. She wasn't racist, Dot. She wasn't biased, Dot. She was just doing her job. But when she had been faced with the truth, she had run from it. And now, she had nothing left to run from. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Leah, her sister, Jessica. Call me? Jessica hesitated. She and Leah hadn't spoken in months. Leah had always challenged her, had always pushed her to see the world differently, had always warned her that one day, her blind spots would catch up to her. And now, here they were. Jessica exhaled shakily, her fingers hovering over the call button. She wasn't sure what she would say. She wasn't sure where she would go. But for the first time, she was ready to listen. She pressed call. As the phone rang, she closed her eyes. The world still hated her. Her career was still over. Her name was still ruined. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe this was the beginning. Jessica lost everything. But what happens next? That's up to her. Redemption isn't about wiping the slate clean. It's about learning from the past and making different choices in the future. Will she change? Or will she stay the same? That's the real question. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. What do you think Jessica's next move should be? Drop your comment in the comment section below.